Hello and welcome to CANNAMAntv. My name is Connor McLeod. In this interview, I get to speak with the founder of the Hemp Hound Agency, Cefyn Jones. In this interview, we discuss the Hemp Hound Agency and what it provides the cannabis industry, the recent novel foods list update and what it means for the CBD industry, the threat of monopolisation in the CBD industry, and separating cannabis from cannabinoids and what this means for capturing industry narrative. Make sure to like and subscribe and join me on Patreon, where you can help to build a stronger cannabis media platform for £3 a month. Now then, let's talk cannabis. Kev, thank you very much for appearing on the channel.
No, my pleasure, and what a great topic to talk about.
Yeah, very much so, very much so. So before we get cracking on the recent revelations for novel foods, could you just give a wee background on your Hemp Hound Agency and what it is you provide?
Yeah, it's an advisory stroke signposting service that has a focus on B2B interaction as well as a little spill-off handling into B2C. And it's just there to represent as many kind of companies within the sphere of legal cannabis, whether that be farmers right down to people who are selling papers.
On your website, actually, I was looking obviously at the most recent article, because you've obviously got numerous news articles and obviously tons of information on your website. It's obviously CBD related, and obviously just past couple of days we've had the Novel Foods Act. So for people that are unaware, that are watching maybe across the states and stuff, that don't know what's going on like with the novel foods, could you describe exactly what it is and what it is we're dealing with at the moment?
Okay, so a novel food is either an old food in a new format or a new food. Right. So basically, someone along the line has decided that even though it's derived from cannabis, we're focusing on cannabinoids, which weren't available in a product format technically before 1996. If there was, then novel foods wouldn't really be so much of an issue. But it is basically because it's rebranding something, even though it's still the same thing. And that's basically where the authorities are kind of having kittens, shall we say.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually been a complete nightmare, to be honest. And I think, you know, when the recent list got published just a matter of days ago, actually, it was kind of like a reminder that we're still going through this drudgery, you know, this unfortunate circumstance. I mean, let's say the industry has been active since, 2015, 2016. What exactly do you think what was the reason that the novel foods got put in so late in the day? You know, the industry was already completely active.
Novel foods isn't necessarily a new thing, as you might understand it. When it comes to the industry, there's been quite a few hurdles, but that novel foods actually came about in 2017, which is basically a couple of years before there was all the noise in Brussels. But it's kind of a little bit of an interesting situation, because that came off the bat of when the MHRA tried to redefine CBD as a purely medicinal compound in 2016. And it was quite interesting because me and my wife were trying to step in the industry at the time, and it was like, oh, maybe we'll get back out again. But, there has been, several points. But when it comes to novel food, in 2017, it was accepted that isolates were novel. Right, because there's no way they would have been on shelves before 2016. Labs, yes. Shelves, no. There's an argument for broad spectrum as well, but that was kind of just there. So the Home Office went to the FSA in 2017 and requested that they placed all cannabinoids as novel from that point. The then head of novel foods, Ruth Willis, she declined on the whole plant spectrum, full spectrum products, and it's from the general understanding that she was demoted for her actual action there. To my knowledge, I do believe she still works at the FSA, just not as the head of novel foods. But then from there was a couple of other hiccups, and that's when Brussels basically jumped in. And it was basically, you have a weekend over here to justify the industry. Thing is, we had everything on that, and by we, I'm collectively, like, we had the Spinettis who were making bread with hemp. You've got Pope Martin II from the 14th century, who loved a cold press hemp in his soup every day, but none of it was cannabinoid focused. And that's basically where they tried to monopolize it. And that's my genuine thought. Arguing that a CBD oil isn't the same as a cannabinoid oil or sorry, a cannabis oil because it's changed name, well, that is not great. That's splitting hairs, and now, unfortunately, that hair splitting has caused a lot of companies to spend a lot of money to get where we are now, and even now, we're not exactly in a place of certainty.
Yeah, it's an absolute. It just feels like a bit of a Wild West circumstance. There's all these different variables that are just going on, and it seems to be unnecessary. It seems like, I mean, I remember at the beginning, just 18 months ago, slightly more, when they were talking about the enforcement was then arriving. It just seemed to be this impending doom, and since then there's been this. It's like the waters have just been muddied as a consequence. It feels.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. I mean, if you were to look at key points, the FSA through the Center of Toxicity, they were given a lot of information to go through. A lot of that information actually came from the World Health Organization as well, who just at that point had announced that 2,400 milligrams a day was acceptable to take with no ill effect. But for some reason, the FSA and the COT just basically ignored all of that information. And they went for the 16 lab reports from one company who's arguably the industry's biggest competition. And that in itself is quite worrying, and also kind of to the point that it might become quite restrictive in the industry beyond this point. You've got companies out there who are like really happy that they've got their products up on the list, but it says awaiting evidence. And to me, I wonder if that's just part of the game being played out.
I can imagine for the companies extremely frustrating, not only for the companies that are awaiting evidence, but the ones that potentially wouldn't have had the money to go on the list in the first place. Because I do remember, I think it said that companies that have a relation to an application process can keep their products on the shelves until, or is that the awaiting process that you're referring to?
If you look at what's there at the moment, with the update the other day, you've got three kind of categories of companies, right? You've got those who are validated, those who have been listed, and those who haven't been listed, knowing full well that they've got an application that ties in some companies that are listed. I mean, there are also people who've got some of their products listed, not all of them, but you've got to look at those three things. What has that update done with all of those companies with awaiting evidence? If I was a validated company, right, I'd be like, woohoo, let's get on the press team, like let's really spin this, like, because we're validated. All of those names aren't. All right. So to me, that's the only people that really get benefit from this list, right? Then you get to the companies who are awaiting evidence. Well, are we waiting for more hurdles to be changed? Like, we're talking big companies who spent a lot of money appropriately on the correct tests, and yet for some reason they're all, I mean, I'm aware of three big applications as a whole. I'm pretty certain that there's more, but certainly the companies that are listed, they can't all be waiting for the same evidence. Like, it doesn't make sense. I mean, the only thing that does make sense is that when you look at the listed companies, they are using a product that really can be removed of THC. Thing is, we've got a load of companies out there that have got other cannabinoids in there in varying levels. To me, it's like we're just waiting for a change in the misuse of drugs regulation and what is the combined total of controlled cannabinoids. And if that does happen, then all of a sudden a load of those products become null and void. And there will be those companies that are still validated because they're able to get their products within the tolerances that give them more breathing space than anyone else.
The thing is, they wouldn't really have any form of, they couldn't impose any form of restriction physically. They wouldn't. How would they implement these kind of, for companies that were just disregarded them and just went, I'm not going to engage? Would they have a practical measure to implement this in the first place, or is this all theatre that's kind of been imposed by the FSA?
This is a thing. I noticed from some posts on LinkedIn that the other day the press were getting wind of this update on the novel list without key industry players. I'm not saying that Hemp Hound needs to be kind of talked to on bits and pieces, but I certainly noticed some bigger fish in the pond who were like, why ain't you telling us stuff?
Funny you should say that. You're mentioning about the industry, the active members in the industry that are obviously not being referenced to when these things are being pushed through the press. So the press were obviously immediately on top of it without the trade associations or any form of authority body. It'd be interesting to figure out if the Cannabis Industry Council was referenced in any way, shape or form when it comes to this. But yeah, so I mean, the article, which was relatively humorous in a negative sense, but there's the Guardian article, and it said that Food Standards Agency draws up list of food products containing cannabidiol, and it's but it was this year. It says move intended to ensure CBD products are safe and what they say they are. But it's been shown so far that the labelling issue, that the methods that they're putting through are inconsistent, and they're not actually showing what they say they are. So what's going on?
That's it. Well, you to my knowledge, there's still no absolute requirement on the testing method for these products. There are a few different methods that require you to prepare whatever you're testing in certain ways. I won't. I haven't got knowledge beyond my name to understand it, but certainly when it comes to some of the tolerances that have been mentioned as a result of Kit Mulhouse having a little moment and saying stuff, are well below what most testing methods would be able to verify. But then that's not so much of the issue. I think one of the other issues is that when you look at the list, there seems to be companies with products that have got a serious amount of THC in. And it's like, hold on, how are they even on the list? Yeah. That doesn't make sense to me whatsoever, unless they were pharmaceutical companies. But then why should they be on a food supplemental list?
Yeah. It's funny that actually just we mentioned in LinkedIn that Kyle Esplin, obviously, the Scottish Hemp Association, did a fantastic article with that. That's like quite humorous because he did obviously pinpoints, the exact errors that are going on, and which show that the articles that are getting pushed through the Guardian and mainstream news are not reflective of the what's actually going on in the industry. And not only that, the thing I'd noticed as well is that the industry authority that the Guardian mentioned in their article was the ACI and nobody else. And yet these are, it seems to be, there's that conflict of interest where the influence of these other organizations on the implementation of these laws initially, draws conflict of interest kind of thing. And I just thought it just seems very peculiar that there are individuals, organizations and associations in the industry which are far more active, far more influential, and there's not even a mention. There's nobody here,
Well, I'll be very careful on what I say, obviously, because what I do and what they do. But certainly, as you kind of look around the different facets of the cannabis world, you'll notice what people's intentions are. Whether they fit in with yours is neither here or there, but you will see that each facet has a left side and a right side. Most facets will talk about anything until you talk about THC. There is always someone who has an agenda, and whether that's kind of to the point where they're able to preach their agenda in certain articles, which certainly the ACI have done over the time. When in my past employment, I used to multiply every day get a few emails of like, what does this mean? And it's like, calm down, they're just saying stuff, and that's it. They are saying stuff, and they've obviously got the potential to have a little bit of more of a higher podium than most, shall we say. I mean, their membership fees are high, so you'd expect them to use them to the best of their ability, whereas some of the other associations out there, they don't charge the earth. They don't really have access to these kind of ways of speaking, which is sad because those who kind of have the money to throw about, it is easy to question their intentions, directions, and whatnot.
It makes me laugh actually, because obviously a lot of these mainstream articles in the mainstream newspapers, their numbers are failing. It's alternative media and it's online sources of information which are become the priority, and it's quite good because there's such a diverse activity in the cannabis industry for people that are producing obviously content, obviously the channels included here, but there's so many others as well. There's a numerous, diverse, growing, excuse the pun, entity of information, and I think it's potentially a consequence of having years of disinformation and misinformation given to you about something you know so much about. Like cannabis community is in a really rare position, I think, when it comes to the science that's emerging, is things that have been intuitively known or subjectively experienced over the years. So we're in a position where it's like, we've had enough of the lies, and I think we're now dealing with this lies in the industry itself. I think, and I think these things are evident when they appear.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't think many people have realised that the war on cannabis has never been just about a war on people who wield Rizla. It's been all-encompassing. Farmers are restricted. As soon as a CBD market became recognised, it was restricted, and that's before you get to the people who just want to have a toke. But in a food sense, it is almost like the war that most people wouldn't really think of. Yet there we are. We're subject to the Home Office trying to pull strings left, right, and centre, and we're all following GW Pharmaceuticals blueprints. And it's like, well, if that's not clamping down, trying to give a bigger window to the medicinal element, then what is? And then of course, you look at the fact that they've I say fact. I haven't clarified this. Have you ever heard that GW grow skunk number 1?
Yeah.
So when we get the Home Office turning around and saying, "Oh, that skunk stuff," where are they getting that from? Because they're not stupid. They know we've got the dogs, the strains that make skunk look silly these days.
Yeah.
But there's no reference to them whatsoever, and it's like, why do you keep on saying that? Are you following a script or something? Because
no, it's interesting you should point that out. That's a good point, because I've always wondered that myself, and I've always applied it to ignorance. So I thought these people are so outdated that they can't even update their propaganda. That's what I've always interpreted it as. But it'd be just perfect, like tongue in cheek, if they were actually using it consciously.
The only way it could be ignorance is if we were to be ignorant in ourselves and assume that reporters and politicians don't touch drugs and are still following the 90s kind of narrative. Yeah. And yet, was it how many Tory member parties came up and said, "Oh yeah, I did stuff," in the leadership election that made Boris Johnson what he is now, and yet it's still like, oh, we don't think we should talk about that question. We'll just lock it down with skunk or controlled cannabinoids or testing resolutions. It's there on every single angle.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time the way it is now. For people that are just obviously joining the cannabis industry and the cannabis world, they won't truly understand. I mean, it feels like, it kind of feels like we're now at this is the what do you call it? This is like post a century of prohibition. That's what it feels like. This is now, the light has shone, but now the light is constricted by people who have allowed it through. And that's what it feels kind of like. And this is just, it's been 100 years of us being lied to, and now we're in a period of the 100 years will be faded out as if it didn't happen, and it just be this new thing will emerge where it's just like, oh no, it's always been this way.
I think you're right. I've been waiting for a change since '96 when I first discovered how to roll a blunt. I've kind of lived in hope. And there have been a few areas where I thought, oh, we're close, but what were we close to? Were we close to ever, the realization of a legal recreational market, or are they going to accept anything below 0.2% THC is worthy of being in a food supplement without novel foods? No, I'm as you say, there's that awakening. Like I said with my father, he went from 2016 from going, oh, that wacky backy to going, all right, son, who's got the best CBD solution on the market? He's even talked about cannabinoids to his doctor, and it's like, that's quite a quick turnaround. Yeah. And I think that's more of what we're seeing. What was the public poll that was released in Jan saying that there was 54% approval rating for the legalization of cannabis in some way or other, decriminalization or whatnot. Mental thing about that has been the case ever since 2019.
You know, I seen that article as well. That's quite good. So I'm pretty certain it was like 30% had actually been against it, and I think the residing number would have been either obviously not participatory. But you know, it's good times. You know, it's just yeah, yeah. I always say this. I always have that thing in my mind where it's like, in the future, I'm going to be saying to my son when he comes in with his Starbucks cannabis, well, I remember when it was back in the day. You know, it just feels like that's what we're emerging towards.
You know what? It's an interesting thought. Where are we heading on that? You know, at the end of the day, because there's a lot of models around the world. Like, you know, what's it? Is it Belgium? You're allowed to grow one plant, but I think in Colombia you're allowed 20.
Right.
You know, there's some people who are regretting that they didn't put a size limit on. Hence, people in Spain growing monsters out their balconies and all of that. Like, you know, and then you see like Luxembourg. You know, are they going for a sensible model? 4 grams, maybe 4 plants at home. You know, is there a sensible way forward for a recreational market that allows people to grow from home? I know this is a little bit off the original track.
Not at all. Not at all. Cannabis related.
Yeah, true. So is there any scope for people to have an acceptable quota of plants at home, as well as a redefining of the black market that doesn't kind of corrupt the potential of people making money and or the realization of a recreational market?
It's interesting because I'm pretty certain London, they're producing a method, is it, or a model or something that emerged there recently. I remember seeing something recently that there's like, I think because they've put in place I don't know, I think it's like a element of decriminalisation to an extent in a small region local to London. And I think this is a trial period, and I think that they're applying some.
For 18 to 24-year-olds, small amounts of recreational drugs. No one asks me for my IDs, the ID anymore. Like, so I wouldn't like to walk around there with a tooth. They look at and go, "You're not, you know, you're over than 24." It's interesting that they've done that, and it's interesting kind of going back to all of the craziness that every single politician that came out after that went on a very kind of similar narrative. Drugs are bad. By drugs, we mean cannabis. Cannabis can lead to antisocial behavior that would normally be associated with hard drug use. So don't do drugs. And by drugs, we mean cannabis. Like, and it's literally every single response. I've seen it from Bojo. I saw it from Starmer. I've even seen a written letter that had, Hague, William Hague as the sponsor of the letter, saying exactly the same thing. And it's like, what is this? Like, you know, and yeah, it came off the back of Sadiq Khan legalizing or decriminalizing recreational drugs, as well as the release of that data from that chart saying that 54%, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, what drug in a recreational sense can't kill you? Because I mean, I don't know anything out there that if you don't respect it, isn't going to cause consequences. However, we all know as long as you're educated enough with cannabis, you know, and yeah, you make sure there's a bit of CBD in your diet, it's all good. Like, you know, so why aren't we hearing about, oh, the dangers of LSD? You don't want to take that. You might climb up a big building, see a dragon and try and chase it off the edge. You know, because that's a real danger. You know,
Bill Hicks when he says that. Bill Hicks says that brilliant thing. So if you're gonna, I can fly. Take off of the ground first, dickhead. You know what I mean? It's like, this is the basis of obviously trying to get through this situation. I mean, what do you see in the near future? I mean, what through Hemp Hound and stuff like that? Do you get a lot of people complaining about this situation being imposed upon them?
Yeah, because I mean, you know, you've got people caught in those situations of, you know, does listing mean anything? Why aren't I listed when my buddy is? That's not really going to help many companies moving forward until there is a sign that someone else outside those 5 have been validated. If that doesn't kind of happen soon, then how more restrictive is it for a company who's trying to sell their products whilst the people that they're selling to or trying to sell to are just constantly seeing awaiting evidence? This update, I believe, has done nothing but harm to the industry, and most importantly, to a hell of a lot of companies that helped build this industry since 2016 and before. So yeah, I get worried for them. But the thing is, what can you do? Right, I think you alluded to it earlier. Everyone's got their own agenda, direction, right? But really, we need to all be thinking together as businesses, and this isn't a sales pitch for Hemp Hound, although, join if you want to. But at the end of the day, everyone has had their agenda. Well, now our agenda is all collective, it's all the same. And that is making sure that we have not just a safe, but also a fair marketplace to function in. And right now, simply by the continued actions that can be trackable since 2016 with Home Office, as well as the Food Standards Agency, we're far from that.
I couldn't agree more. And do you know what it kind of feels like as well in novel foods? And I think it's because it's ongoing. And also because the industry was obviously in place prior to novel foods coming into place. But it's kind of like a real-time example of kind of like an attack on the cannabis industry. That's what we're dealing with. It's kind of like you're watching and waiting for the new assault. That's what it's kind of like when the new study or the new thing list is arriving. And the thing is kind of like when you're looking over the list, it's like 3,000 products. There's only like half a dozen companies that have got these. How is this? Like, it seems so disproportionate that surely there wouldn't have only been.
There's 68, I think, not including the 5 that were originally there. They've all got quite a lot of products, but they all kind of intermingle. So, for example, one of the big companies on there, British Cannabis, some of those products will be used for their sub-license holders who might not quite be on the list at the moment. So they'll just be reaffirming their stock and catalogue so that then that works for those that are on a sub license. I believe so anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of like a white label service.
Yeah. If a product was on the shelf before February 2020, then it was allowed to carry on to set up any kind of application for novel foods, whether through themselves or as a sub licensee. Now from there, things got messy. And as you referred to, like the constant tax there, straight after the deadline, we had Kit Malthouse come out and state about controlled cannabinoids, and we also had the Business and Energy Industry Strategy Office, that one set up by Theresa May, coming out and saying about controlled cannabinoid level and testing resolution. You are right in that there is an attack.
It's just it's just a peculiar time because we're watching. It kind of seems like an authentic influence onto the industry emerging continuously, and you're kind of powerless to interact with it. And again, it's like I'm aware, like that's the only thing where that, like at the moment, the Scottish food standards, they are hopefully taking a more appropriate response where the hope is essentially that instead of having obviously this novel food situation, which would be the full spectrum will be in the category of hemp seed as a food stuff, and then isolated CBD and synthetic CBD would be regarded as novel because of their manufacturing process, and that would seem like a much more cleaner approach than just this muddy, it's all novel, even though that it's not because we've used it for thousands of years, and then the industry was relatively efficient. There are obviously people that are going to be cowboys and kind of like inefficient, but the industry wouldn't have arrived and been so that it grew exponentially if it was full of if proportionately the industry was mainly people that were inauthentic. It wouldn't have survived. We're in a position because the industry is largely people who are family orientated and are trying to build a future for themselves.
That's how they'll have you have it. And it, like, how many dealers do you know actually are rough and tumble evil people who are going to commit crimes, and it's the same with CBD products. They have sensationalized, but you're mentioning about synthetic products, and you are right here because most of us plant derived, and as you said, family businesses, right? Even when it comes down to isolate level, it's known where it comes from. It's a plant that's well studied, despite the many times that they tell us that it isn't.
Mm.
Like, so if you look at that sensibly, right, whole plant, that should never be novel, right? Anything that is full spectrum but is made completely of isolates obviously should be, as well as anything that is just isolate driven. And yeah, there is an argument for broad spectrum. But synthetic, right, it's not just different. Right, and I think Kyle from the Scottish Hemp Association pointed out, and I get confused, the difference between a left-handed and a right-handed molecule, and the synthetic, whatever-handed, is or has less affinity with CB receptors. Right, so not only is it made in a mental way, right, but it doesn't even make a true facsimile of the natural thing. And yet that at the moment is looking more favorable for you to go and get validated with, as opposed to a plant that, again, only seems to be getting ripped apart for money, cannabis versus cannabinoids, that's never killed anyone. This synthetic stuff scares the crap out of me. I really do. As a lot of people are in this industry, it's for the love of the plant. So how do you get into an industry where you take that love of a plant and create something based on that plant, but in a Frankenstein manner?
And the same thing that you'd mentioned there about Kyle's article, that he also mentioned the addition of 2 or 3 isolated cannabinoids and then labeling it as a full spectrum. That's another danger, which is completely misleading.
Oh, yeah, I tell you what. A few years ago, I actually wrote an article on the definitions of full, broad, and narrow spectrum, and it had mixed receptions. I have heard like variables on that before kind of getting to this 2 cannabinoid aspect. There is one company who sells full spectrum with non-detectable THC. But mine's, it's a good company, don't get me wrong, but I've always had this kind of like, hold on, that's like Schrodinger's cannabinoid. Is it there or isn't it there? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. And then we got to the point of novel foods, and it did sound like that some companies were trying to redefine at least broad spectrum by combining 2 isolates and a terpene profile. And it was like, is that right? Because, to my understanding, a narrow spectrum product is 2 or 3 cannabinoids, and that's it in an oil. Maybe a bit of flavoring or terpenes, but that is narrow spectrum. Broad, that is basically everything minus full fat. And, full is full fat. So, there's that. So when companies were trying to redefine this, it was like, well, you're not working for the consumer here, are you? Because most people will go online and see what that difference is. But, well, what happens if they all of a sudden read the product list and go, well, does 2 cannabinoids make it what you're selling it as? And that's always been my fear. There are kind of people who would say that, in all essence, there's no way that you get anything but the full entourage effect if you were to have, say, a cold press oil, or something like that. Whereas some people will say no, it can just be a full spectrum with a couple of terpenes thrown in, and you can get the entourage effect from that. Some people will say, well, broader spectrum, maybe, but are you going to get it effectively from an oil that's got 2 cannabinoids and a little bit of flavor? I don't know. That's for companies to decide with their marketing spiel. But I could understand if some consumer was to turn around and question whether that was kind of misleading.
It's very frustrating considering the knowledge that's behind the cannabis industry, the individuals that have such an in-depth understanding of the molecules, the phytochemical basis. And then we've got this regulatory association and authority which is putting in regulations which don't consist with the plant, because the reality is, to prioritize CBD isolate or any form of isolated cannabinoid is to strip the plant of its essence. The reality is the cannabis plant itself it has such a wide influence on the human and human society and all that kind of thing. it's not meant to be stripped down to one molecule. That's supposed to be categorized in a small little niche area where individuals that are in situations, medical conditions that require it. It shouldn't be something that should be the predominant accessible method of taking it. That's not how it almost reminds me of like Demolition Man or some crazy futuristic society which they've removed any form of, you know, like good, and now it's just this technological, you know, it's like barren of meaning or substance or holistic elements, you know.
Single molecule part, I agree with, because the only time that I normally hear the word single molecule is when medication follows behind after. And, I fully respect that CBD can help people as a kind of standalone component, but yeah, at that point, you kind of do question: is it actually a medicine that we've got there, or is it a food supplement? Don't get me wrong.
To be honest, Aristotle comes to mind. Food is medicine. You know, that's what it comes down to. I think, you know.
That is the point, you know, and I think that is pretty much the line that's getting blurred deliberately, just as much as the line between cannabis and cannabinoids, and ultimately why we're in this novel food saga, which, talking about it, there is that question of, is all of this kind of process anti-competitive? Because who is winning? I don't know, because technically we're still all in limbo, whilst that list still only has those 5 validated companies on.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think is going to be happening in the next year or so? I mean, is this going to be, we have to wait another 12 months for any other companies to be validated, or is this a monthly process?
I haven't the foggiest on that. I don't believe there's actually been an update in regards to it, but considering the FSA stated that they would be uploading 5,000 products on a day, where they uploaded 3,300, I believe, there has to be more to come, and obviously they do need to kind of indicate, certainly to those companies that haven't been added, why they haven't been added. So what happens after that, though? That was the question. And that kind of depends on the industry. You know, if people are prepared to just basically roll over and allow their bellies to be rubbed, they're going to continue enforcing guidelines that, haven't really been discussed with the industry. And at what point does it become so frustrating that it's only really a company or an industry that is populated by big pharma?
Like, there's novel foods is so important because I think that it's like a, I don't know if using a Trojan horse is the right description, but it seems to be a scapegoat in some form. You know, that this it seems to be covering more than just the food element. It feels. I don't know if that's just potentially looking into it too much, but it does seem to have additional consequences above and beyond what's going to be accepted as food stuffs or otherwise, you know.
Well, that's it. You know, why would the World Health Organization say 2,400 milligrams is safe to ingest a day, only for the the Center of Toxicity and the Food Standards Agency to say 70, because we got lab tests that suggest that beyond that could lead to the potential liver issues. That doesn't really make sense to me, unless that's been deliberate to increase the scope for the potential of medicinal products to be used, because maybe 70 milligrams a day isn't the 80 milligrams that you need. And yeah, most people might take 1 or 2 more drops, but what if it's specific dose? That person doesn't realize they need just that little bit more. Well, is that then time to go see the doctor, and go that road?
Yeah, no, it's a good point, because I mean, I think that is one of the purposeful misinformation techniques they're applying, is the separation between CBD, the medicine, and CBD that you can get through your local health food shop. You know, that seems crucial to maintain the profits of the CBD medicine. You've got to make this other thing less than efficient for what you're looking for.
Well, let's be honest. Someone dropped the ball at some point, isn't it? Because from my understanding, GW had a a patent for a CBD preparation, I believe, in 2004. You would have thought at that point there would be some kind of clampdown, but for some reason that cannabinoid wasn't made prohibited. However, all of the prohibited cannabinoids, I do believe, you can find listed on GW Pharma's patents list, as well as the 48 for CBD preparations, as well as the 26 THC.
Mm.
And it's, if you think they've got the reins, they've got all of that, it is actually within their interest to disrupt and throw lab reports at us, literally to make sure that they have that gap. And don't get me wrong, if anyone from GW Pharma is going to watch this, I would really encourage them to kind of consider addressing some issues that, if they answer appropriately, it would give the industry just that little bit more confidence in moving forward in good faith. And that's what it is. During the whole process with novel foods, right? Admittedly, the Home Office were in a little bit of a kind of scenario where they were getting directed by the Home Office. But at the same time, trying to find out what the definition was on whole plant and selective cannabinoid extracts, trying to get direction on the validity of cold press. There was some key questions that were constantly asked and no information was given back. It's going back to that kind of NAF process again, isn't it? And is it competitive, and who is truly getting the best out of this?
Yeah, that's a very peculiar circumstance, it seems. Definitely just, especially because of the fact that there's legislation getting pushed through and not being recognised by the associations and organisations that have cannabis on the label. They have cannabis organisation, cannabis association on the label, and these companies are getting bypassed when these extremely important measures are being put in place. I don't know if that's the typical British way, or if it's just blind ignorance, or if it's profiteering, it's a mixture of all three.
Oh, have we mentioned Theresa May and Victoria Akins at all?
Yeah, I know. Have everybody shouting at their screen. Yeah.
But, certainly when it comes to influence, yeah, the industry, I believe, as a whole has been awarded lip service at best, whilst other people's agendas are carried forward. Some people might say, "Oh, the ACI." You know what? They might have been quite happy to work quite closely with the Food Standards Agency, but I don't believe that they're the ones pushing this whole saga forward. They're just enjoying the show because their agenda happens to fit the way that the market is going. So, I mean, in that sense, you can't really blame them. However, we can look at two other kind of entities inside of the industry who were completely whole plant. And what's happening is just absolute farce. Fair enough. If you are dissecting the plant to its component parts, then you have to accept that it's novel. However, that's not to say that we should be kind of having to turn around and say cold press hemp oil, whereas really around the world you've got people saying CBD oil, just so that someone can't lose money. It's just a crazy kind of pulled apart world that really most companies need to come together and ask these questions, that the likes of these bodies, they might ask some, but they'll only ask the questions that fit their agenda. So, as an industry, we need to come together and really we need to approach the FSA and say, are you getting directed by GW Pharmaceuticals through the Home Office? If that's the case, then that's anti-competitive. That's completely at the interests of one company over an entire industry. Right. And there's further questions from there, like, did they go to the Food Standards Agency in 2017 and try and initiate novel foods then? The answer is yes to that, but it would be nice if they kind of admitted all of these bits and pieces and how basically they are the middle people of someone's agenda. And that person's agenda or entity's agenda is to seriously restrict our availability to cannabinoid products so that they've got a larger window of attack.
Mm-hmm. It really does emphasize that it's kind of like, you know, the amount of the layering effect of prohibition from the top all the way through the emerging industry. It kind of just makes it more and more evident how important cannabis is going to be for the future. You know, that you have this, that so many individuals that are trying to put themselves into a position, and not only that, direct the route in which it's taken. You know, it's like cannabis is potentially more important than we assumed it to be, you know.
Yeah, fair play to anyone who's got, you know, business savvy, you know, who can get up in the morning, look at something and say, right, if I do this and I do that and market it right, you know, I'm going to live a comfortable life. Fair play. But, you know, when you look at a plant that has benefited so many people in so many ways, not just as a food or a medicine or like me being able to play bagpipes, you know, you've got a question. I mean, we could question prohibition. We know why it's there, but we can question the fact, or should question the fact, that basically these politicians know that we know what this plant is all about. You know, the vast majority of people like ourselves can see that there is a money grab going on, but is that right? I mean, you know, we've got an endocannabinoid system. We've got a right to life. As a result, we should have the right to be able to top up our endocannabinoid system in any way that we see fit. And yet we're being put in a position where we can get limited cannabinoids through food products. And if we want something that might be important for us, then we have to go to some company who, let's be honest, grow weeds that's nowhere near the standard of street weed. Did I say that? But you know, it is basically a money grab that you know, is of questionable direction, because you know, it is a plant, everyone should have access to it. The fact that someone's basically trying to pull cannabis from cannabinoids and gives one company basically the whole plant without the plan, you know, you've got to question that, and I think is absolutely shocking. You know, the plant has still got so many uses as well, which are all getting explored as the rest of the world kind of liberate the plant. Like, you know, and you know that there's something going on here, because you see the tax dollars over there that's being generated, and why would they ignore that unless something else has turned their head? But you know, you see like hemp wood, some people are making golf clubs out of the stuff now, like, and it's like, bloody hell, where does this plant? So I'm hoping it'll improve my game, actually, but you know, that's maybe a podcast for another day. But you know, the longer we kind of continue the way we are, the more the world kind of shows us how amazing this plant is, whilst we're stuck on this island being restricted by a company who's got their own interests at heart. And that, yeah, it's just a horrible thing to see.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly hoping that the next couple of years, if we, as long as keep pushing, then we'll have more of an influence. And I think the noise that the trade organisations are making and associations are making, and just the average consumer and medicinal patients and everybody else that's involved, I think the more noise you make, the more, as the industry emerges, the people that have self-serving interests will essentially dilute out. You know, they won't be present because there's too many of a collective unit of like, we need this to be what it has always intended to be, you know. And let's be honest, we've waited long enough. I think the stigma needs to dissipate. And I think it doesn't help, you know, Guardian articles and things like that. But let's say high five to everybody that's attacked these things, because it's necessary, you know. It really is.
It is, because there's that new wave of bollocks coming out, isn't it? Oh, sorry. Like, did you see the man who amputated his downstairs after a case of psychosis?
No, I didn't.
Wow, it's a funny thing, because apparently this guy abused weed for 3 years, then had a 3-month break, and then literally picked up a bong, stuck 2 grams of hash in it, had a psychotic episode, looked downstairs, thought, that don't look right, and then took a pair of scissors to it. Right, and it's like, wow. Thing is,
I don't know what's more impressive, the fact that he cut his own balls off, or the fact that guy smoked 2 grams in one bong. That's impressive stuff.
Well, this is supposed to be in Thailand as well, so you'd like to think that the
Yeah.
solid out there is certainly resinous, shall we say. It's just like fighting a hopeless battle. I mean, going back to the guy who chopped his what's-its off, I do speak, I have a connection who knows the king of Thailand, and what's going on over there. So I literally laid in a call and said, is there any chance you could check this out? And word on the street is that no one knows of anything like that happened in Thailand. And so you'd assume that if it hit the UK press, but not the local press over there, it probably didn't happen.
Yeah, I'm sure there's numerous ones of them. Unfortunately, the Guardian article that we're referring to earlier about novel foods, that's accurate. That's bullshit that we're dealing with on a daily basis, without a doubt. But if people are wanting to interact with the Hemp Hound Agency and become active, how would they do that?
Of course, yes. Go to www.hemphound.co.uk, or you could message me through the website, also on LinkedIn and Facebook. I do have an email address, but I have a Welsh Christian name. So it is kevin.jones@hemphound.co.uk. However, Kevin is spelled Cefyn.
Nice. Well, let's say, Kevin, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Likewise, Connor, you take care, and thanks for having me.
Thanks to Kevin for giving his time, and thanks to you for sticking around until the end of the video. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the content. I'll see you next time.